following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back talking vintage sports from Nedick's at the Old Garden on 49th Street. I stood corrected last week and changed the entire show to 49th Street. I think it was David who helped. He's here tonight. David Hubler, George Case III is here, Hal Bock is here, and Al Blumkin is here. Full house. We're first going to congratulate Houston and the Dodgers. Pretty good World Series, have to say. Thoughts, you guys?
I have a thought. Why are we playing two National League teams in the World Series?
That's a travesty. That was brought to you by Pud Selig, and he had his own daughter's team in mind, and that was one of the worst moves in baseball.
Well, the Brewers and the Cardinals played in the 1982 World Series.
That's very true.
Well, there was something in the paper.
League at the time.
I know.
There was something in the paper the other day about them maybe doing away with the two leagues and adding one or two teams and forming 14 division. Four divisions.
Football. God, that'd be unbelievably bad.
And that way,
I hope not. I hope that doesn't happen.
No. I do too.
Why do they keep fooling with a great game? I mean, they just won't leave it alone.
I agree, Hal.
There's
so
much tradition in the National League and the American League and the differences and the stars and those like Frank Robinson and Pappas and all these people that played in both leagues and trades and all that. Stop messing with it. Leave our memories alone.
Yeah, I agree.
It's kind of sad. But, we're all pretty much Easterners. We have an affinity, all of us, in one way or the other. We don't have to love the Yankees, but we all respect them. And I thought it would be nice if we could harken back to the days that we talk about for the Rangers and the Knicks and the Jets and all that. Let's go back to the first Yankee dynasty of my youth, 1949 to 1953. And obviously 5 in a row. I don't think any team in baseball history before or since did that. To start, I think, let's start with 1949.
Yeah, Ralph, I did a presentation on this at the Sabre Convention in Chicago in 1986.
Really?
Yeah, I did a whole write-up on this topic back then.
Good. So let's start with you, Al. 1949. Casey Stengel was hired by George Weiss 2 years after he took over as general manager. And what was the feeling? I'll ask you this. New York Press, when he was, in fact, named Yankee manager.
Well, a lot of people couldn't believe it, but the worst was Dave Egan, who was a alcoholic writer in Boston, who Ted Williams hated. And Dave Egan wrote in that 1 year when Stengel was managing the Boston Braves, he was hit by a cab at the beginning of the season, and he had a permanent knot in his leg after that. And Egan said that the cab driver was the biggest baseball personality in that year. And I remember reading this because I was doing a bunch of research on Bucky Harris back then, and it was going through the sporting news. And I said that Dave Egan said all the Yankees are going to get out of Stengel was a few laps and no pennants. But generally, the hiring was because of Stengel's reputation as a clown, the fact that he had managed the Dodgers and the Boston Braves for quite a while without success. They thought that this was generally thought that this was not a good hire.
You know, there was an instance he took off his cap and a dove flew off.
Yeah.
Anybody remember when? That wasn't when he was.
That was a long time ago. Yeah, he was a player at the time.
Yeah, he was in the. I think he was on the Pirates, and he came back to Ebbets Field for the first time since he was traded there by the Dodgers, and he saw this unconscious bird, lying on the ground for some reason. He put it on top of his head. He put it on the cap, and the first time he got up, he took it off and it flew away.
By the way, you mentioned Stengel getting hit by the cab. When I was researching my book, I was in touch with Casey Stengel. I think she's his grandniece, and she told me the story about that. They lived on a high hill, and what Stengel did to recuperate, because he had this leg injury, to strengthen his leg, he would walk up the hill and down the hill backwards to get down to the ballpark to strengthen his quads, I guess, in the back of the leg there. And she said he was also very, very conscious. He did not want to walk with a limp, and he was trying to get rid of that cane as quickly as possible, so that he would walk normally. But of course, Stengel did have a sort of little gimp in his leg. If you remember how he come out to out to the mound, he was sort of a little hitch in his legs. But she told me that he just did that religiously every day, so that when he was going to the ballpark in Boston, how he to strengthen his legs.
Well, I have a question for the panel. I have a question. He came to New York with a reputation of being something of a clown. Now, why would the high and mighty Yankees, very dignified organization, want to hire a guy who had a reputation as a clown?
Because he had a relationship with George Weiss that went back to their days in the Eastern League, and I think he worked for Weiss after he finished playing in the mid-1920s, and they had a relationship going back all the way.
Yeah, but still, I mean...
He had just won a pennant in the Coast League with the Oakland Oaks, and he had won one for Vec in 1943 with the Milwaukee Brewers in the American Association. And
but you're still running a major league team has just come off of championship in 1947, and you can't fool around. You got to get a guy who's a legitimate, well recognized manager, and yet they reach out for Stengel.
Bucky Harris was let go because he was, according to Weiss, he wasn't disciplined enough. And Bucky Harris was a MacPhail hire, so I mean, it's like the Dodgers after O'Malley took over and wanted to get rid of anybody associated with Rickey. Weiss, when he came in, wanted to get rid of anybody associated with Larry MacPhail.
Alan, I wanted to ask you something about, you mentioned about Bucky Harris, and of course I'm a little bit prejudiced because, my dad played for Bucky, and Bucky was so well respected. But Bucky led the Yankees, I believe, to the World Series in '47, right?
Yes,
they won the championship. In '48, Bucky was still there, but Cleveland won. Now,
the Yankees were started by a couple of games.
Right. Was that then a reaction? Say, hey, Bucky, thanks for everything, but you didn't win in '48.
Yeah, one of the things I read was that when the Yankees were floundering, midway through the '48 season, Harris was insisted that the Yankees bring up Bob Porterfield from Newark, and Weiss said he was not ready, and there was a lot of friction. I don't know if that was the only case, but there was a lot of friction between Weiss and Harris. So when he let go, as I said, he had this long relationship with Casey Stengel going back 20 years, and he felt that he could deal with it. Of course, they weren't expected to do anything in 1949. I mean, the Red Sox, who had lost the pennant in the playoff the year before, were loaded, and they were an overwhelming favorite to win the World Series win the American League pennant in 1949.
But didn't it go down to a Yankees-Red Sox series right at the end?
The Yankees beat them the last 2 games of the season,
yeah.
1 by 1. Yeah. Yeah, Joe McCarthy became
when
the
Joe
first.
DiMaggio was coming back from that hit.
Yeah, he missed half the season that year. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my first. Actually, that was the first season I remember rooting for the Yankees, or even knew of the Yankees. Prior to '49, I didn't know anything at all.
Well,
he beat me by 2 years.
And you beat me by 2 years. I didn't really know anything about it, but in '51, I got to see all 3 ballparks in New York. I was 4 and a half, and my grandfather took me to see the Giants before and after Willie was called up that year when they reconfigured everything. And the Yankees, I pointed out that Joe DiMaggio, you're going to see him, you're watching him to the last time, that he'll never play again. And then Ebbets Field, my grandfather's sister lived on Bedford Avenue right across from, you could see her apartment, and he points out to me, that's your Aunt Sonny, that's her apartment. So I got all 3 ballparks, and I fell in love with the Polo Grounds. And it was that expanse of grass, that outfield that went forever, and we all were New Yorkers. All we had, David Hubler, was Harris Field in the Bronx.
That's right. Well, actually, to give credit to the Bronx, it's known as the Borough
you have
Parks.
Beautiful parks.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Right.
Meshuggah Park. My grandmother would have said Meshuggah Park.
Yeah, well.
But and a bunch of them.
We never liked that pronunciation because it was really Marshall.
I learned at the age of 8 in 1951 strictly from the baseball cards. My parents, my grandparents, they couldn't have cared less. Because anytime I got a quarter or whatever, I'd go buy the Bowman 1951 cards. That's how I learned about this stuff.
I have a Mickey Mantle Bowman 51 card.
Real one or?
No, real one. Yeah.
Wow.
I've had it since 51.
Wow. Yeah.
Oh, indeed. That predates the Tops.
Yeah, they weren't really photographs. They were like artist rendering or something. I mean, you could tell that they weren't photographs.
Right.
And one of the first cards I got was Yogi Berra. So I said, "Who the heck is this?"
Well, my first baseball card I ever saw was Sally Hemus.
Oh yeah.
It was
just
set
passed away,
TVs.
Yeah.
And
he died a couple of weeks ago.
Did he really?
A couple of weeks ago, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, he's 93. Yeah.
I think I missed that. He was a coach with the original Mets, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Rest in peace, Sally. St.
But
Louis
the big thing about that whole era, Ralph, was that they made the transition from DiMaggio to Mantle, from Billy Johnson and Bobby Brown to Gil McDougald, from Jerry Coleman to Billy Martin.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there were only, outside of the 3 pitchers, Rashi, Reynolds, and Lopat, there were only 4 players who played in 100 games or more in each of the 4 or 5 seasons, and that were Yogi, Phil Rizzuto, Hank Bauer, and Gene Woodley.
And there were 13 players, count them, 13.
12.
12, okay,
yeah.
that played on all 5 all 5 Yankee teams.
Yeah, those
and
4.
As a matter of fact, I read something. Charlie Silvera was eligible for all 5 World Series.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Only got up 1 time.
He played when Yogi busted his thumb in 1949 and missed a month. That's the only time Silvera got over 100 at bats. And Silvera got down to 1 game in the 1949 series, and that was it.
Yeah.
But he is one of the 2.
He hit 280 something, filling it in for Yogi.
He's one of the two oldest living Yankees.
Eddie Robinson's the other one.
And Eddie Robinson,
and
right.
Bobby Brown's still alive. He's 90.
Yes, and Bobby Brown. Yep.
93, yeah.
And we,
that sequence of 5 years, there were some magnificent moments that stand out in World Series history. And I think the first one would have been the home run that Tommy Henrich hit to beat Don Newcomb in the opening game of the 49ers.
Yeah, that was the first walk-off in World Series history.
Yes, it was. And it set the stage for, I mean, some great moments in the history of this game, of this epic that's opening tonight in Los Angeles. You had the great Billy Martin catch on a little pop fly by the mound. Nobody moved for it.
Yeah. Right, and he comes flying in from second base. Yep, absolutely.
Yep. There were some great moments.
May I just hit on one thing? George, you mentioned that your dad played for Bucky Harris.
Right.
Could you quickly tell us something about Bucky Harris that we may not know?
Well, I can only tell you, all the stories that my dad loved Bucky Harris, and my dad considered Bucky Harris during that era as the best manager in baseball. So,
why was that?
I just think his knowledge of the game and the fact that the players enjoyed playing for him, and they didn't have a lot of success, but the players didn't have quite the talent either. But Bucky had pretty much proven himself, I think, as was called the Boy Wonder in 1924 when they won the World Series, and then in 25 with the American League pennant. So, he was very well thought of by the players, and as far as handling the pitchers, I really can't tell you, except that I know that, Sid Hudson and Dutch Leonard and Ray Scarborough and those guys and those pitchers really enjoyed, having Bucky as the manager because he treated them as men and they had a very good relationship. Now, I also wanted to mention one thing, and I have to bring this up because it has to do with our topic. I personally attended Game 2 of the 1950 World Series with my dad. And that 1950 World Series, Game 2, Joe DiMaggio hit a 10th inning home run, talking about moments in World Series history, to beat Robin Roberts 2-1 at Shibe Park. And for me, it was quite a thrill. I'm 10 years old. I'm going to the World Series with my dad, who played and knew many of the players on both teams. And it was, a tremendous thrill for me as a 10-year-old. I'll never forget it.
Whitey Ford won the last game to clinch the sweep.
And Whitey Ford and my dad had been together at a baseball dinner, and I have the photograph of it in 1951 when Whitey was still in the Army. Whitey came and spoke at a baseball dinner in Trenton, and I have the picture of Whitey sitting next to my dad, and Whitey had his Army uniform on. And my father, he was a teammate of Allie Reynolds with Cleveland, played against Eddie Lopat. A lot of those players were very good friends of my dad, and that's, I think, probably one of the reasons we went to the World Series is that, my dad wanted to say hello to all of them and be with them. And the fact that my father also had maybe many of you don't know, but the ball players, if they're 10 years in the major leagues, they get a silver lifetime pass. And my dad probably used that pass, and maybe the ticket that he got for me was given to him by somebody, I don't know. But for me to get off the train from Trenton, New Jersey, walk 5 blocks up to Shibe Park and see where my dad had played and got his first major league career start, played in the 43 All-Star game at Shibe Park. I was thrilled, and I'll never forget that opportunity.
The Phillies were your team because you.
Well, the Phillies were, they were known as the Whiz Kids, and a lot of those, a lot of those players. I mean, 1950, I met, Robin Roberts and Kurt Simmons, and they had great infield and outfield. They were a terrific team, but the Yankees were the toast of the town. I think they swept the Phillies in 4 straight, all close.
They did, right. Mm-hmm.
But I'll never forget that.
Big surprise in that World Series in 1950 was that the Phillies started Jim Constanti.
Yes, they did.
Their relief pitcher.
because Bob Miller had a sore arm, and Bubba Church had been hit in the face by a few weeks before the season ended by a line drive by Ted Kluszewski, and Kurt Simmons went into his National Guard unit. He was a 17-game winner that year. His National Guard unit was called up for the Korean War in early September. So they went on gas when they finally beat the Dodgers at the end of that season.
Right. I think they beat the Dodgers on. Yeah, I think they beat the Dodgers, didn't they, Alan, on that home run by Dick Sisler?
Yeah, the last game. If the Dodgers would have won that game, they would have forced a playoff.
Right.
But yeah, that was the game that Cal Abrams became infamous in Dodger history for getting thrown out at the plate, with the winning run in the bottom of the ninth.
Okay. Al, was that the same Bob Miller that later pitched with the Mets?
No, this is Robert John Miller. He always looked like his cards always looked like he was 14 years old. But he had a decent year, and then he hung around for several years after, but he was never really very good after that.
I remember they had interesting nicknames. Granny Habner.
Yeah, his first name was Granville. They had Pudd'nhead Jones.
Pudd'nhead Jones was the third baseman.
Right.
And there was
the immortal Richie Ashburn.
Yeah, they had Eddie Waitkus, who had been shot the year before. Right. And a ball player I thought for the 50s was extremely underrated. Never got the credit that he deserved was Del Ennis.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I agree.
Yes, with the Phillies. Absolutely.
Now, I want to tell you one thing about Del Ennis. Del Ennis played for the Trenton Spartans in 1943, and they were managed by Walter Alston, of all people.
Wow.
And I just mentioned that because the Trenton Ball Club was owned by my dad's half-brother, and I have a picture of that Trenton Senators team with Del Ennis in the photograph. So, I went back and took a look at the history of baseball in that area, and I was really surprised to see that Del Ennis had actually played in Trenton, and at the time they were very close. I'm not sure when he came up to the Phillies, but Trenton and Philadelphia are only 30 miles apart. So
yeah, and Ennis came up there, and his rookie year was 1946.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Now, I also wanted to mention one other thing. Yeah.
How far is Trenton from New York, George?
About 60 miles.
So, okay.
A lot of people who live in the Trenton area actually take the train to New York every day.
Wow.
So people will take a train or drive to Philadelphia because it's 30 miles, or they'll take a train to New York City, which is 60 miles from Trenton. So Trenton is strategically located between both of those two metropolitan areas. And I did mention the other day, where I lived in Bucks County, we were fortunate because we were able to pick up all the New York channels and all the Philadelphia channels and watch all the games.
Wow.
I always got a kick out of that sign on the trestle there, what Trenton makes, the world takes.
Right.
It's right near the Campbell Soup.
That's the way it used to be.
An industrial town than it was a bedroom community, Trenton.
Well, yes, it was. It was very prosperous. There were a lot of major industries in Trenton at one time. They're all gone now, but Trenton was a very prosperous city. And I mentioned the other day also a very strong baseball city. A lot of great baseball players came out of Trenton. So it was strategically located.
There was a minor league team there, and the fact that your half uncle?
My dad's half brother, which was my uncle. My dad and his half brother were 30 years apart. So a lot of people thought my dad's half brother was actually my dad's father, and he was really his half brother.
So this was your dad was a second life for your grandfather.
Well, it was, and I also wanted to mention one other thing, and then I'm going to stop talking, but. Alan, you mentioned about Jim Constantine starting that first game of the 50 World Series. It just so happened that Jim Constantine, after his baseball career, had a sporting goods store in Oneonta, New York. My dad managed up in Oneonta for 4 years. My dad had a sporting goods store after he retired. So he and Jim Constantine had a lot of business contacts together as well as their baseball backgrounds.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Constantine actually had